Good evening. My name is Peter Mcbride, and as many of you know, I'm the new director of the Cohen Centre. It is my great privilege this evening to welcome you to this, our annual Holocaust Memorial Lecture. One of my first jobs as director, and I was really privileged that it happened this way, was that I got to interview Ben Ferencz. Ben is over 100 years old, and I have to say, if I am as lucid and insightful as he is at 100, I'll be very happy. Ben is the last surviving prosecutor from the Nuremberg trials. And in the course of this presentation, Ben asks and answers the question, is the rule of law still important? The fact that we're asking that question, the fact that it is still important, is a reflection of the global jeopardy in which we now find ourselves. And it seems like now more than ever, as we look around us, it is really, really important for us to ask and answer these questions. After Ben's talk, we have the opportunity to ask some questions and for it to be discussed by a panel of experts. We're really privileged to have the panel chaired by Dr. Jim Waller. The panel consists of Dr. Elisa von Joden-Forgy and the Honourable Judge Patty Whelan, experts in their own field who combined together will be able to answer our questions and respond themselves to the challenges laid down by Ben. I think this is a really significant time for us to be discussing these issues. It is a really serious topic, one that needs to be dealt with respectfully and carefully. Our hope is that you will enjoy this evening. Even though that we are joining together by Zoom, I hope that you feel connected to us as we consider these important issues and work towards a more peaceful, more just world. Thank you.
In the artillery, I was absolutely useless. I was bullied all the time, and they tried to bully me. They never bullied me. Nobody bullies me. and I was reassigned. So I was pulled out and said, we're sending you to General Patton's headquarters. Report to the judge advocate there. Oh, okay. We had already landed in England. If it got through, we were already in Trier and France, and the Germans were in retreat. And I reported as to the judge advocate section, and he said, well, we've gotten some orders from Washington to set up a war crimes branch, and your name has been forwarded from Washington. And I was surprised to hear that. But one of the ways I had kept from starving while I was in law school was to work for work, and one of the jobs was to be a researcher for a professor, Sheldon Gluck, who had written a book on war crimes. So I was pretty knowledgeable about war crimes. And I suppose that when they went to him, they said, you want to know war crimes? I got Benny out there somewhere. You go find him. He knows all about that. So anyway, they said, your name has been forwarded. All right. And I was then a Tech 5, which meant a corporal. And they said, well, what's a war crime? This is a true story. Absolutely true. The colonel, he said, what's a war crime? They knew about the rules of war. I said, well, war crime. I began to explain it to him. And he said, well, you take care of that. So I was the first man, I'm sure, in the United States Army to be assigned to deal with war crimes. The second man who was assigned was also a private by the name of Jack Nowitz. And he reported and he saluted me. I said, don't salute, sit down, I'm a corporal. And he said he's been assigned. He spoke Hebrew, and he corresponded with his mother in Hebrew, and he was a Jewish boy, of course, from Connecticut. And he was a buck private. And I said, okay, we are supposed to set up a war crimes branch. Oh, that's nice. And okay. So we were the first two people to deal with war crimes in the United States Army in World War II. Okay. Now begins the fun. Colonel comes in, he says, we got a report from, looks like prisoners of some kind, coming out of a camp of some kind. They all look like they're starving. And check it out. Okay, I get into my Jeep and off I go. And I landed first, and it was an advanced camp on Buchenwald, big camp. It was an advanced camp, had another name, Gusen. And there I had my first experience of the results of war. I come to this Buchenwald camp, dead people lying on the ground, looking up, their eyes, if they could still move, pleading for help. Crematoria going, stench in the air, burning bodies. Everybody's running in different directions. The SS are trying to escape. The inmates, some of them are trying to catch them. And then I was to write up reports, collect evidence of the crimes, and write up reports so that we would hold it for possible future trial. From Buchenwald, I went to the next camp. They pushed the Germans back. I didn't stay in the camp longer than I had to because it was every disease was there: dysentery, diarrhea. It was a horrible experience. And the next camp was pretty much the same: Flossenburg, Mauthausen, another camp, another camp. I would stay in the camp no more than absolutely necessary to collect the evidence, sometimes because the front had not yet moved. So I would go following close behind the front to get in as fast as possible in order to collect the evidence of war crimes. All right. Then I would go back to wherever I was billeted, write up a report, give it to my colonel, he'd forward it to higher headquarters, and we were laying a foundation then for war crimes trials. Now, my own reaction to what I saw, I think I had built up an artificial barrier to say that this can't be true. This must be some kind of a Hollywood set. And some individual things which I remember quite accurately, which affected my judgment and other things, was we came to one of the camps, and one of the inmates was a clerk in the camp, the Schreiber, as he called him. He said, "I've been waiting for you." And he said, "Come with me." And he took me out to the barrier of the camp. The barbed wire surrounded all the camps, electrified fence. If you touched the fence, you'd be killed, be electrocuted. And he took a shovel with him, and we dug up a box from one of the posts. We went back to the office, cleaned it up, and it was very interesting. What the heck is this guy trying to show me? Well, he goes into the box, and he brings out a bunch of pads half this size, you know, little booklets. And it was a club which had been formed in the camp by the SS, the stormtroopers who were in charge. And they were a social club. And every time they attended a meeting, they put a stamp in that they attended the meeting of the social club. And when the book was full, it was about 3 or 4 pages, he was ordered to issue a new book and throw away the old one, destroy the old one. Well, he didn't destroy it. He hid it. He took his life into his own hands. Every time, I'm sure, as I know the SS, they would have put a bullet right through his head. He hid that, knowing that there would be a day of reckoning. And I was that day. And of course, that became invaluable evidence. When a guard who said I wasn't there, Mr. whose name was this, had a picture of the guy. They had the dates he was there, and so on, where he came from, and I had an address. Complete identification of everybody in the camp, the SS officers. So it was a very valuable piece of evidence, and I remember the story primarily because it showed they didn't give up hope in a circumstance which would have been life and death for them. They risked the death time and time again, knowing knowing that there would be a day of reckoning. And I was that day. Okay, I moved on to the next camp. Some other experiences which shaped my background. Come to another camp. I don't remember. It was Flossenburg or I don't want to try to break it down to specific camps because I don't really remember which camp it was, and it doesn't really matter. There, the inmates, after Americans had come in, the inmates had caught one of the guards. And I guess he wasn't very popular with the inmates because they were beating him, and not unconsciously. While he was still conscious, they took him and they put him on one of the gurneys, which they used to dump bodies into the crematorium. And they took him to the crematorium, which is nearby, and they put him in, tied down to this metal gurney, a tray really, and warmed him up. The fire was going, took him out before he was burned, beat him up again, put him back in again, took him out again, beat him again. It took about 2 or 3 times, and he was adequately roasted. They left him there. And I'm watching this. And I have a M1 rifle. The camp is in chaos. Everybody's running around different places. But Jesus, how am I gonna, how can I stop this? And I had some experience in Paris, and in Paris and other cities in France, when we had come in, and some of the German girls who had been sleeping, the French girls who had been sleeping with the German soldiers, they took them in the town square and they tied them to a chair and they shaved her hair off the top of her head and they'd slap her in the face and spit on her. And I came in as the liberator of the town. And I see that going on. I fired my rifle into the air a few times and let her go. She's on her arrest. And then they stopped and I take them on. So I had saved her from a continued abuse like that. And I'm in the camp now. I think, boy, if I try shooting up this in the air, they're going to grab me. And in that circumstances, there's no place to be a hero, Benny. You just watch it. And it was pretty horrible thing to watch because it was a demonstration, a live demonstration, if you call it live. What happens when you let vengeance take root? I saw the vengeance in action, and it was a horrible thing. And it reinforced my feeling that there must be a better way than just doing what I saw. Comes the VE day. The war is over. What do we do now? I quit. I joined the army to help win the war. We won the war. I'm going home. And I was honorably discharged, awarded 5 battle stars, and told to go home. Okay. Now what do I do? Well, I'm back there with about 10 million other GIs looking for a job. It was hard to find a job. Well, one day I get a call, cable. Dear sir, please come to the Pentagon. We want to talk to you. They never called me sir in 3 years of military service. And okay, I go and I report. And I'm interviewed for the first time by a guy by the name of Mickey Marcus, colonel in the Army. Now, Mickey was a Jewish boy from the Lower East Side who had practiced boxing as I had to self-defense. And he said, Benny, we want you to go back to Germany. I said, me, go back to Germany? You must be kidding. In order for me to go back to Germany, you have to declare war on Germany and be losing. He said, no, we have war crimes trials. We're starting war crimes trials. You know all about it. You've been there, and you've set up the thing for the trial. We have no staff. We need staff. We need staff who know what they're doing. And I said, look, I'm not going back into the Army. Finished. He said, well, there's somebody else who wants to talk to you. So he refers me to the somebody else being general. He was then a full colonel, but got soon promoted to general. Telford Taylor. Telford Taylor is a story in itself. We later became law partners in New York. But at that point, he interviewed me. And he said, I understand, I've checked your military record, that you're occasionally insubordinate. I said, that's not correct, sir. I'm not occasionally insubordinate. I'm usually insubordinate. I said, I don't obey any orders that I know are illegal or stupid. And I said, I'm checking up on you, and I had. And I don't think you'd give me that kind of an order. In which case, you can't find a better man. And he said, you go with me. And so he hired me. I go back, and Telford said, look, we have a lot of suspects locked up. We don't have any evidence. You know where the evidence is. You know what kind of evidence is available. You know what it takes to convict. So your job is going to be, we have tentative trials mapped out, 10 other trials. And we were assigning lawyers who had applied for jobs with this Pentagon to all of these trials, but we need the evidence. So you set up an office and collect the evidence to convict the people that we have in custody, because there's no use going after Hermann Goering, he's dead. There's no use going after some other guy, they escaped. So that was the assignment. So I put together a staff of about 50 people, and I set up an office in Berlin, which was the source of most of the documentation. And I provided the assignment of the different lawyers who were working on an SS case or working on an industrialist case, working on the foreign ministry's case, or against the doctors who would perform medical experiments on the inmates. I had different people working on different cases, and I directed them where they might find the evidence. Any evidence they got, they would come back to my headquarters there. It would be then shipped over to Berlin, to Nuremberg, where the defendants were, and they would prepare for the trial. So it was an important assignment. One day, one of my researchers comes in, he says, look what I found. And he hands me a whole pile of papers, and it is Ereignismeldungen aus der UdSSR, which is in German, had me translated to English, situation reports from the Eastern Front. And these were reports prepared every day by the units of what they called Einsatzgruppen. The word Einsatzgruppen is hard to translate. Einsatz means action, group is Gruppen. But it was deliberately given a nomenclature which nobody would know what the assignment was. And their assignment, which I also had in the documentation, was 1, kill all the Jews, men, women, and children, without pity or remorse, eliminate them. This is a stain on German blood, and we have to eliminate, because then we'll be able to recreate the great Germany. We are the greatest, we are the greatest, we are the greatest. He didn't say the United States, he said we are the greatest. And so I look at it, and I take a little adding machine, and I start adding up how many Jews were killed by the Einsatzgruppen. And when I reached 1 million killed, I stopped. I took a sample. I got on the next plane down to Nuremberg, where the trials were already in process, Jackson's trial, and Telford Taylor was preparing subsequent trials. And I see General Taylor had been promoted to general. I say, General, we got to put on a new trial. He says, we can't. The budget has been approved by the Pentagon. We've given them the cases that we intend to prosecute, and we just can't do it. I said, listen, I got in my hands here mass murder on an unheard of scale. You're not going to let these guys go. And he said, well, can you do it in addition to your other work? And he said, sure. I said, sure. He said, okay, you do it. Okay. And so it came to pass that the little Benjamin Ferencz, was then 27 years old, about 5 feet high, and became appointed the chief prosecutor in what was the biggest murder trial in human history. I accused 22 defendants, and I'll come back to that in a moment, of murdering in cold blood over 1 million innocent people. Now, The Einsatzgruppen consisted of 3,000 men. Their reports covered that I had about a year and a half. And I'm the chief prosecutor. So my first question is, 3,000 mass murderers. I have their names, I have their rank, I have their top secret report, which they sent to fire headquarters. Hell, more do I need? However, a big problem. The International Military Tribunal trial against Goering and company had only 22 defendants. If I came in and said I want 69 defendants, that's going to not look right. So the thing was, you don't, you just limit it to 22 defendants. Can't have more than that. There's no more room in the courtroom. In other words, we'll be sitting there forever. Okay, so I have to pick out the 22. This was, and it was my personal decision to be approved by Telford Taylor, who was my boss. And I figure, well, where's the scale of justice? I got 22 defendants. I know, and I can prove that every single one of them was a mass murderer. What about the rest? You can't talk about justice. There's no justice possible under these circumstances. So what would make this trial significant? We would have to try to get a principle of law established. The victims in this trial, in this case, were killed because they didn't share the race or the ideology of their executioners. And I thought that was a terrible thing. And if I could focus on that and ask the court to affirm by international criminal law the right of all human beings to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or religion, color or creed, if I could get that, then I've got something of value, of permanent value. And that's what I asked for. It is with sorrow and with hope I have begun that we here disclose the deliberate murder of over 1 million innocent and defenseless people. Vengeance is not our goal, nor do we seek merely a just retribution. The case we present is a plea of humanity to law. And that was what I was asking for. It was a plea of humanity to law. And I closed my opening saying that these defendants in the dock are the vile executioners whose terror wrote the blackest page in human history. Life was their toy and death was their tool. If these men be immune, then the law has lost its meaning, and we must all live in fear. Prosecution rests. As you can see, I am still moved by my own plea, but so is the court. And they followed the request that I had made. All defendants were convicted. I rested my prosecution's case in 2 days. 2 days. 22 defendants. They started with 24. The other two dropped dead of sickness and whatnot. And nowadays, it takes them 2 months to decide when they want to get started. But I wasn't up for that. 2 days, I rested my case, convicted all of them, and 13 of them were sentenced to death. And I'll give you my reaction to that. It was a grim scene. You may have seen pictures of the Nuremberg courtroom. It's a typical courtroom. The defendants are kept in a prison right under the courtroom itself. And they come up from the prison down below in a small elevator. It comes up and the sliding doors into the courtroom open up and they step out and then they put on the earphones. For the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. The earphone back, go back, the doors closed, and they drop down into hell. That was the picture I saw it. Death by hanging, death by hanging, death by hanging, death by hanging. People would think, hey, well, boy, look at this, a great victory. There was no such feeling whatsoever. I got a splitting headache on the first death by hanging. It was the tension. The courtroom absolutely quiet. No sound in the courtroom. The audience in the back rows, not a big audience, but maybe 10 rows of people. And death by hanging. And it was the custom among the prosecutors, when you were the chief prosecutor on the case was over, you invited the whole staff to come to your home for a party. And I had to extend an invitation as well. I went home, I didn't go to my party, I went to bed. And so it was a strange reaction, maybe, but that was the truth of it, okay? And when the dust had settled down, it took a while. I thought, well, what do you do now? What do you do with the rest of your life? I said, what happened here was a terrible thing. And it's going to happen, and it is happening again and again and again. If I could stop that, if I could diminish that, that would be something worthwhile. And so, without spelling it out in detail or writing it out in detail at that time, I sort of dedicated the rest of my life to trying to create a more humane and peaceful world, because it was just so horrible not to do that. And I am now in my 101st year. I was then 27 years old. And I've been working on it ever since. So, and I'm glad to see you coming along, and a little bit late in the day, but better late than never. And what happened since then? How do you go about changing the current practice, general practice of, if the two heads of state are unable to agree, they declare war, and they go on and they kill each other's nationals as long as they can until they get tired. Then they stop, have a peace, they rest for a while, then they start again, and they do it again, and they do it again, and again, and again, and again. And that seemed to me so stupid, and so mean and cruel and rotten, that there was nothing I could do which would equal my satisfaction if I didn't try to change that. And so I have been dedicated to trying to change it. The world as we find it now, and what we can do about it. We can just shift the scene. Unfortunately, my attempt to persuade the world that war making is a terrible thing, as I am convinced it is, no matter what the cause, my answer was to that, settle it by a court. There was no international criminal court after the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg was closed down. That was the end. We had no international criminal court to deal with the type of crimes I was concerned with. So I said, well, I'll work on creating an international criminal court. And I wrote 2 volumes called An International Criminal Court. The gist of it is you don't have to buy the book or read the book. My books, everything is free from my website. We have to have a court. Okay, court, who needs a court? Well, eventually, what do you know? We have a court. Anyway, and I continued working. And I am continued working now. And I work incredible hours. I go to bed 10 o'clock at night. I wake up 7 in the morning. And 365 days a year, I work on trying to create a more humane world. Am I having success? Hell no. But we're making progress. We're making progress. Never say never. Never say die. Never give up. I believe that the next war, if we have another world war, and I see no reason it'll never happen, that we will use all of our weapons. Our most recent weapons are not the nuclear weapons, which were horrible enough to begin with. So they outlawed it. Nobody's supposed to use nuclear weapons anymore. But they still spend millions of dollars preserving the nuclear weapons because they don't know what to do with the waste. But then also they may have to use them. But there's something more ominous, which has not yet come into the public domain generally, and that is cyberspace. I was invited to a peace conference of some kind in the city of St. Petersburg, Russia. There was an American general who was also invited to come from the Pentagon. We were the only two Americans there, and we got to buddy a little bit, and we were having breakfast in the morning together in a quiet corner of a hotel in which they put us. And I said, "What are you up to now, General?" He said, "Well, I'm working on the cyberspace problem." Cyberspace problem? What's that? How do I know about cyberspace? He said, "Well, you know." He leans over and looks around. He says, "Well, we now have the capacity from cyberspace to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth." I said, "What is it?" I'm so dumbfounded. So, electrical grid on planet Earth? What for? How do you do that? He said, I said, "What's the effect of that?" He said, "Well, everybody within the range of our attack is dead." I said, "Well, did you figure out how many people they would die or kill if we got in that kind of a situation?" He said, "I'm not familiar." This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. With any study which has really been done on that subject. But my own feeling said is that it would depend upon the amount of water they had. If they had enough water, they probably could survive for about a week. How nice. For about a week. And then everybody's dead. How nice. And so we have a big department in the, I said, "What's your problem?" He said, "The problem is so can the Chinese and so can the Russians do it, and I'm on my way now to China." And I'm passing through. I said, "Oh, well, that's a nice situation." So I walk away a little bit stunned. Since then, I've learned a little bit more, not too much, but still very secret, about cyberspace weapons. But we are spending today, in the United States, billions of dollars on cyberspace weapons. You can be sure the Russians are doing the same, the Chinese are doing the same. I don't know about the Israelis. They're usually 3 steps ahead on scientific knowledge. That's the world in which you live. And what do you do about it? Well, if you listen to the President of the United States now, I'm not going to try to make any political statements. You can vote for whoever you want to vote for. It's your conscience, not mine. But you get guys like John Bolton, who was very close to this president, who took him with him when he went to Russia, when he went to China, and I don't know where. John Bolton has been very explicit. His argument is there's no such thing as international law. You can't enforce it. And he's valid on that point. We have failed to build the enforcement mechanisms we need. He said, so why do we pay attention to it? We have the power. We're the most powerful nation on the earth. If anybody just does something we don't agree, give it to them. You know, just bomb them, that's all. Get rid of them. That's a philosophy. Everybody is entitled in a great democracy to have differences of opinion, and it's inevitable that there will be people with different points of view. And he is entitled to say what he thinks. But from my point of view, that's madness. It's homicidal, it's murderous, it's terrible. And it should not be accepted or considered as a potential possibility. Unfortunately, the President of the United States seems inclined to be influenced by that type of reasoning. That type of reasoning is madness. And to give you the clearest example, I wrote a little book intended for general consumption called Planethood. And the gist of that book was that we have to stop thinking in terms of nationhood or personhood. We must think in planetary terms. We are all inhabitants of one small planet, and we must deal with the resources on that planet so that everyone can live in peace and human dignity, regardless of his race or creed or economic condition. Everybody should be entitled to it, and it can be done. We have those resources. We waste them in all kinds of ways now, but we have the possibility of doing that. if we just recognize, and I come to three little words, because I know people like simplicity: law, not war. If you can substitute law, which means you settle your disputes before a court or before some kind of impartial body, rather than you turning to war, look what happens. You'll help the people who are most needy with legitimate complaints that you're entitled to live like human beings, not to have your baby snatched away from you because you want to come to the United States. That's a crime against humanity. They've written books on that too. And you don't have the capable things what they do now. You go to war, you kill people, you start again. What kind of a system is that? So instead of using the money to increase your capacity to kill people, you use the same money, capacity to help people, to see that boys can afford to go to college, the girls can afford to go to college, and medical care for the aged like me. I don't need their money. And for all the social things that we have to do to satisfy legitimate complaints. People have no housing, or they're bombed out, or they're killed by disease. You can't just leave them die in the streets. So the policy which we follow now is suicidal. It's not only the dumbest thing I can think of, to spend your money for seeing how to kill more people instead of how to help people. It's stupid. It's just plain stupid. And that's what I'm trying to do. That's why I'm here talking to you. That's the world in which we live. Don't you get discouraged, Betty? No, I don't get discouraged, because discouraging doesn't get you anywhere. And I see the progress. We have made big progress. My being here talking to you is progress. And we have universal declarations of human rights. I am flooded with letters from all over the world saying, hey, boy, you're right, you're on the right track, how can we help? And that encourages me too. I have three pieces of advice I always give at the end of a lecture like this. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3,
never give up.
You got it.
Ben, it is an absolute pleasure and joy listening to you. I think so. I want to ask you one final thing. So on the basis of all your years of experience, everything that you have been through, there are people who will be watching this and listening to this in years to come, and they will want to know, as I want to know, as you reflect on all of this, to those of us who want to make a difference, to those of us who want to change the world, aside from not giving up, is there any one kind of piece of advice or one strategy that you would recommend or suggest that for you has been the single most important thing that has sustained you in this work?
You can ask yourself, each one of you, is war better or law better? Knowing that our capacity to kill in war is going to result in millions of innocent people being slaughtered. That's your choice. Rule of law is the only available option. So I can think of nothing else than turning to the rule of law. It has to be improved, of course. It has to be more effective, of course. It has to have a better enforcement technique. I wrote 2 volumes on that too, enforcing international law. These are gaps in our structure of a peaceful world society. But we are working on it. People are, you're asking me to come here when I'm 102 years old and keep going. And we'll keep going, because you just said, never give up.
Never give up.
Reach that conclusion yourself. Yeah. If you never give up, what do we have to do? We have to change our hearts and minds. We have to change the hearts and minds of people so that they don't think that compromise is equivalent to surrender. They're ready to compromise, to understand the other fellow's point of view, to understand the basic human needs for security as well as food. We have to start teaching that, and we are teaching it in many schools. I'm very close with the Harvard Divinity School, which is ecumenical in form, but teaching compassion instead of killing as being the admirable thing. And so it seems to be so sensible, what I'm saying. And the other thing so horrible, how can people call me the one who is the fool? The world is left to you, and others like you should change it, and it can be done. So don't conclude that it can't. It'll take time. There'll be administrations who believe only in power. Doesn't have to be the one in Washington today, but in other parts of the world also. We have to change their way of thinking, change their hearts and minds, and I'm hopeful. That's all. What else can I do? I do my best.
And you're an inspiration to anybody listening to you, and I hope that the next 100 years are as successful as the first. You're an inspiration to listen to.
Thank you. It's very kind of you, but it's not good enough. We have to be more successful than I've been. But you can do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Dr. James Waller, the Cohen Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies here at Keene State College, and thank you very much for joining us for tonight's discussion with Benjamin Ferencz. As we continue our discussion on the rule of law, I think it's right and fitting that we acknowledge the recent passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her life and work epitomized a deep devotion to the rule of law, a deep devotion to social justice, and a deep devotion to women's rights. She will be sorely missed at this time in our history, but tonight's presentation and discussion, is a rule of law still important, stands as an enduring testimony to her life and work, and your interest in joining us stands as an enduring testimony to that question as well. Tonight, to discuss a bit more some of Ben's comments and thoughts on the rule of law and its importance to the world today, I'm joined by two people I'm very privileged to call both friends and colleagues. The first is the Honorable Judge Patricia Whelan. Judge Whelan served for 5 years as an international judge at the War Crimes Chamber in Sarajevo in the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina. In her role there in the court, she presided over genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes trials. She's had a 40-year legal career that's been devoted to public service and the belief, the deep belief and abiding belief that the rule of law can create and sustain a pathway to peace and to justice. We're also joined tonight by Dr. Elisa van Joden-Forgay, who is a new colleague of ours here at Keene State College. She's an endowed chair in Holocaust and Genocide Studies and an expert on gender, genocide, and its prevention. Elisa is a scholar with ethnic German roots in Poland and the Czech Republic. And in large part because of that, she's devoted her life, a very productive academic life, to understanding long-term genocide prevention within the framework of legal, moral, and historical accountability. I've asked Judge Whelan and Dr. van Joden-Forgay to each make brief remarks, no more than 5 minutes. I'll make some remarks, no more than 5 minutes, and then we'll open it for questions and discussion after that. So Judge Whelan, I'll turn to you.
Well, thank you, Jim. Do I just hop in here? I'm very honored to be part of this presentation with Ben. It's a true privilege, and my thanks to the Cohen Center for this opportunity. I'm still amazed listening to Ben and thinking about his contribution to the body of work at Nuremberg. This work led to fundamental principles which guide international criminal law today. The Cold War had put a stop to the work at Nuremberg, as well as to the growth and development of international criminal law. And it wasn't until 1993 and 1994, with the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that the work really began anew. My court, the court in Sarajevo, was established by a UN resolution in compliance with the Dayton Accords. And the War Crimes Chamber was established to continue the work of the tribunals within the context of a national court. Our mandate was to try both generals and foot soldiers. And for the most part, we had the law of Nuremberg and the early case law of the criminal tribunals to guide us. I arrived in 2007. 750 people worked in the building, which had been the site of a military court. And that energy in the building was incredible. War crimes were being tried in the country in which they were committed by both a national and international staff. And we were committed to fair trial procedures, and we were hoping that the trials themselves could bring peace. I believe in the rule of law. Like Ben, I think it is the only path forward. And I understood then that we were there to hold both individuals and governments accountable, and to try the accused in a fair and impartial manner under both national and international law, and protecting, fundamental human rights. So Nuremberg was the light that both guided and sustained us. And, but there's two aspects of Ben's interview I'd like to just quickly comment. And one is just to remember the power of individual action. I mean, Ben's integrity and strength in pushing for another trial that would have been ignored but for his persistence. It reminds us all that we need to speak up and stand for what is right. And that's so crucial today. We can't remain silent. And second, it's this very moving retelling of the story of the prisoners and their guard, and the basis of why he's committed to the rule of law. I mean, war destroys trust. It makes a mockery of the rule of law. And in conflict, adjudicating war crimes is a way to begin to destroy the rule of law and honor the people who choose to say no, to honor those ordinary persons who find the courage to not participate in the slaughter, the ones who choose not to separate themselves from humanity but act with integrity and compassion, to honor those witnesses that come forward, like the man in the box with his story, and trust that those witnesses will be heard. Without their bravery, there would be no trials. And of course, today, we have to talk about today. The rule of law is more important than ever as we watch our institutions be, systematically destroyed by politicians who want all the power and none of the responsibility that is inherent in the rule of law. The most important thing I learned adjudicating genocide is that it's not the big actions that lead up to it. And of course, the big actions that do lead up to it must be recognized and fought. But it's sort of those daily, tiny steps that build the road to hate. Every day we see our country here balkanized with divisions among our families, our neighbors, our communities, our select boards, our Congress, and all at the feet of the executive branch and our president. We must remember who we are, and as Ben says, reinforce our common humanity, and truly never give up. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on Ben's work.
Thank you very much, Patty. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please keep entering those in the Q&A portion, and we'll get to that after we've each made our remarks. So now I'm very pleased to turn to my new colleague, Elisa.
Thank you very much, Jim. I'm so honored to be here and to be part of this beautiful panel and part of this wonderful evening. And I'm sure that I speak for all of us when I say that I was very deeply, deeply moved by Benjamin Ferencz's remarks on the Nuremberg trials and on the importance of choosing law, not war. His remarks are so timely and come in a moment when the world as we know it is being challenged as it has never been challenged before, perhaps, by a looming climate catastrophe that is of our own making. In such a time, the threat of genocide increases, as we know, as societies fall back on deeply coded ideas of self and other to address resource scarcity and conflicts over things like land and water and security. So if we do not learn the lessons that Mr. Ferencz teaches, to choose law over war, we risk condemning ourselves to a century even more fearsome than the 20th, characterized as it was by 2 world wars, the Holocaust, and numerous other wars and genocides, the effects of which we are still experiencing today. Mr. Ferencz's remarks also resonate so deeply in our present time, an era when leaders seem to be flouting the law more than honoring it, embracing violence over justice in ways both big and small. In the United States, which at the time of the Nuremberg trials was attempting to stay the hand of vengeance, is now threatened to be engulfed in a similar darkness as new harms and injustices are being built upon older ones. The importance of Mr. Ferencz's work towards the goal of law, not war, which he has diligently pursued over the many years of his life, cannot be overstated. He is a treasure to our common humanity and has shown over and over again how we can all work towards global peace, and indeed how we must all work towards global peace. Tonight, we were honored with a rare glimpse behind the scenes of Nuremberg as the United States and Allied powers wrestled with the horrors of the Holocaust and Nazi atrocity crimes for the first time and sought ways to address these crimes in a way that would prevent their reoccurrence. And as we saw, there was no clear template of what should be done. No obvious path forward presented itself in the face of such evil. Mr. Ferencz and the men and women with whom he worked were diligently carving out spaces of light out of the darkness with only the strong compass of their own sense of ethics and hope. This is a story writ large of the eternal human dilemma when faced with our own destructiveness. How do we move forward as individuals and as a species out of a darkness of our own making and into a light that sometimes seems so frail and far away? At a fundamental level, we are always being guided by little more than that moral compass. We are therefore so fortunate, and we must remember this, to live at a time when the tools of international law and atrocity prevention are stronger than they have ever been before in human history. There is now an international criminal court to try atrocity crimes, as well as a host of international and domestic laws and mechanisms to prevent atrocity crimes and bring perpetrators to justice, as Judge Whalen just discussed. These tools help sharpen the navigation of our compass, and we must work with them. There is no other way to solve the problems we have created, to mend the world that we have rent. In one of the most moving moments of his remarks, Mr. Ferencz tells of being presented with a canister of evidence that had been hidden away by prisoners in one of Germany's many concentration camps, in the hopes that one day there would be a reckoning. And as Mr. Ferencz says, he was that reckoning. He was that day of reckoning. Those survivors and the many victims who did not survive, who at that moment they represented, offer us an eternal cri de coeur, that our suffering be recognized, that the wrongs done to us be accounted for, that we live in a world where our dignity is honored and seen. International law recognizes and codifies the principle that, to paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King, injuries to this human dignity anywhere are injuries to human dignity everywhere. The exchange of that canister between Mr. Ferencz and that prisoner was therefore much more than simply an exchange of evidence, although it was importantly that too. This exchange was an enactment of justice in small, a moment when self and other came together to affirm the fundamental value and irreplaceability of each and every human life. It is to the credit of leaders at the time that that canister and the hope of all the human hearts that had filled it saw the light of day in trials that addressed the enormous harm that had been done. This story, so human and humane, is emblematic to me of the power of the work that was done at Nuremberg and that has been done since in international criminal tribunals, wrestling with the worst and darkest realities that we as human beings insist on creating for one another time and again. As I often tell my students, the success of these efforts ultimately is in the trying. The efforts we make, no matter how small, or in Mr. Ferencz's case, how large, are in and of themselves so valuable in reaffirming the noble dream of peaceful life in common on our ever-shrinking earth. So I want to thank from the bottom of my heart Mr. Ferencz for the tireless work he has done in his life, and Peter Mcbride, the Cohen Center, as well as Keene State College, for lifting up his important message at this most important time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you also again, Patty, for your comments. Just very briefly, I want to make my point of connection to the central question of Ben's presentation, which is, does the rule of law still matter? Why is the rule of law still so important? In my work, I work specifically with perpetrator behavior and perpetrator psychology. So it's meant that over the 25-some years I've been doing this work, in addition to a tremendous amount of time spent in archives around the world, I've had the chance to interview face-to-face 225 alleged and convicted perpetrators of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Some in prison, some having served their time and out of prison, many of them probably never going to be brought to justice. And one of the things I've seen as I try to understand the psychology of how people come to commit the types of crimes that Ben so viscerally pointed out in his presentation, one of the things I've noticed is that these perpetrators live in a psychological state that we call expanded present time. In other words, while the atrocities are going on, it is very difficult for them to think of what lies out there, what consequences might be there, because most of their focus is on the here and now. And the consequences that may be down the road are consequences relatively hidden from their psychological understanding that helps explain why in their mind it's justifiable to commit the atrocities they're committing. But one of the things we know about the rule of law, and Ben hit on this several times, is that it is there, that we cannot exist in a world where people can commit these crimes and have impunity for the crimes they are committing. That day of reckoning that Ben talked about has to be there. Not just reckoning for the individual punishments of the people who perpetrated the crimes, but a recognition that the reckoning is there so that when people contemplate committing these type of crimes, they can break out of that expanded present time, that there is some recognition, there is some knowledge that when this is said and done, justice might well be a consequence. Unfortunately, in the world we live, and certainly in my experience with the perpetrators I've interviewed, that consequence of justice being there hasn't weighed heavily enough on their behaviors, because they look at the world and they recognize that by and large, the people who perpetrate these atrocities generally do get away with them. That international law, as Ben said in his statement, still hasn't developed the enforcement mechanisms it needs to develop for it to really serve as a clear deterrent to the types of crimes that we see perpetrators committing. So my hope for international law, and my hope for the rule of law, certainly as it relates to genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, is that we do develop it to an extent, the enforcement mechanisms, the body of law, the reality of it, to the extent that perpetrators will have to think twice twice before they commit their actions. They will have to ask themselves the questions, is it worth doing this? Knowing that there are judicial justice consequences, knowing that there is a reckoning. And for right now, in too many cases, my fear is that perpetrators commit the atrocities they commit relatively free of any type of fear of reckoning or any type of fear of justice. So as Benjamin Ferencz concluded, there is still much work to be done in making the rule of law a reality in our country, for everyone in our country, and across the world for people who suffer from human rights abuses and violations as well. So we have had many questions come in. I'll do my best to try and pull together some good ones for our panelists. We have had at its height over 270 people attend this webinar tonight, which is really a wonderful statement and testimony of your interest in this important topic. We have had people from around this region, around this country, and we have questions from Melbourne, Australia, that are also part of the questions as well. So the first question I'll ask Patty and Elisa is, in terms of the rule of law, how do we help the people who govern us understand why choosing law is so important? Because for most of us as common citizens, we feel a little bit powerless in trying to communicate to our leaders, not in authoritarian systems, but even in democracy, democratic systems, the system seems so far away. How do we communicate our wishes that we want to choose law rather than war?
Are you waiting for me here? Well, you know, I think I wake up every day and ask myself that very same question. You know, one thing I would want to emphasize is just, you know, we have to kind of begin where we are, and that means in our family, within our community, and you know, just simple things. When I came back from, I was 7 years at the court in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and when I got off the plane and came home, my husband showed me an article that just took place in our town, where the local school board, without notice to the community, and in violation of the Open Meeting Act, had decided to shut down our local school. And I have to admit, I was just filled with outrage. And I, you know, immediately, you know, my lawyer head went in, and we, you know, I filed a complaint and began a whole series of discussions in our community. And, you know, granted, it only affected our community. I mean, it was it was a huge issue to us, but perhaps small in the big picture. But it's important to fight where you're at. And I think, you know, can I convince the President of the United States of the error of his ways? I don't think so. But can I convince, you know, my next door neighbor, my select board, my school board? Hopefully I can. Hopefully I can generate the fact that this democracy is, we're all responsible to it. And we all have a voice in it. And, you know, that's not a very good big picture issue. You know, the big picture, you know, should we become part of the International Criminal Court? I would say yes, absolutely. We need to, you know, it's got a lot of problems. I think Americans have a responsibility to fix it. We need to talk to our senators. We need to have in the United States, we don't have a crimes against humanity statute. Write to your senators. You know, these types of things are perhaps the bigger picture. We can't let people off the hook for, you know, making international law effective. But sort of a long-winded answer.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. Elisa, any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to underscore how important I think it is to look at this in a local context, and just for all of us to think about ways in which we can not only try and convince those around us or our local leaders about the importance of law, not war, but also try and kind of embody the principles and the ethics behind that idea, which is simply the value of human life over all else, and certainly over politics and certainly over power. And I think that, you know, part of that is also then acting on a more national or larger scale. I think collective action is incredibly important when we're faced with war and crimes against humanity, whereas we may not be able to convince leaders, you know, of the importance of law over war if they don't agree with that. Certainly we can reduce the extent to which they see the value of going to war or the value of committing atrocities to their own power. So popular pushback can be incredibly, incredibly important. And sometimes in history, we are asked to stand up and to show up and to work together peacefully to put a stop to disasters and catastrophes. And those of us who study genocide and mass atrocity crimes know how many societies end up sort of being dragged into those atrocities blindly without expecting them to occur. And as we get better at recognizing the signs, I think we're going to need to, as a global humanity in our planethood, you know, come together and try and fight for the principle of peace and the value of human dignity together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Judge Whalen, we have a question from a student specific to you. And the question is, can you express the feelings you have when you sit in judgment of war criminals? How can you still give them a fair sentencing and hearing when you know the pain and suffering they have caused? How are you able to separate yourself from that?
Well, I think, you know, first I would say that we're trained to do that. That might seem like a simplistic answer, but it's more, you know, what was really important to me is not just that we met out justice, but that we do it in a way that is just. And that means you have to listen very carefully to both the prosecution and the defense. You know, compassion plays a big part in this, I think, because the one thing you see when you see perpetrators, and I think that's been your experience, Jim, is their own, you know, these are not happy people, let's put it that way. You know, vengeance isn't the goal, but a trial gives you the ability also to listen and respect the victim. And you're doing that work when you have a trial. So you're doing both things. And it would be meaningless if we didn't hear out the defendant. And in fact, you know, there were war criminals that were acquitted because there was a failure to prove their guilt. Not that anybody particularly doubted their guilt, but there was an actual, you know, you do have to rely on evidence. And that's, you know, you put that head on as soon as you sit down behind the bench, is you want to see the evidence. Show me the evidence. Show me that box. What's in that box? What does that box say? But if the box isn't there, you also have, you can't convict people just on your gut.
Thank you. Elisa, we've had several questions come in about the Rohingya in Burma, Myanmar. To what extent do you see the rule of law being able to resolve the injustices and the violence of that genocide today? Is there still a window for the rule of law to do that?
Yeah, those are great questions, and I don't know the answer, and I'll make a short comment, and then I want to pass it over to Judge Whalen, who has more experience with that. You know, I think trials and just simply the fact of stating calling something by its proper name, calling crimes by their proper names, have a huge impact. They have a huge impact on international relations. They have a huge impact on public perceptions, domestically where the crimes are happening and abroad. They have a huge impact on domestic governments who don't want to be seen in certain lights. They can lead to new trials. They can unearth new evidence. So trials are always useful, but as we know from the past, they generally can't stop wars or violence that is ongoing at the time of the trial, because the problem of enforcement and then the fact that law and war exist in two different spaces, and law can't contain war. I saw a question that someone asked about how do you then contain violence, right? If not with war, and that's one of the key questions. But I think the hope is, amongst many people working in genocide prevention, is that over the long term we continue to take steps and weave a very, very strong fabric of peace, such that it becomes harder and harder and harder for leaders to resort to war and seek to solve problems through war. But I would like to hear what Judge Whalen has to say.
Well, I don't know, the specific answer to this. But I do know, I mean, you have to look at what created the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. And that was a huge outcry. I mean, there's a huge public outcry. They were seeing what was taking place in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And granted, most people didn't understand what they were seeing, but there was a huge international push to do something. People were being slaughtered, and something needed to happen. What my problem right now with the Rohingya is it's lost. It's lost in the so much other kinds of turmoil are going on, and maybe that brings us back to our responsibility to not just to urge our government to what their responsibility is when it comes to the responsibility to protect, but to remind them that they're there. I mean, we need to have a voice there. It's depressing to look at Myanmar and their current situation. It's depressing to see how resolute they are in just dehumanizing a section of their population. And I don't have a good, clear answer for what to do next.
Oh, thank you. We will, in the Department of Holocaust Genocide Studies, we certainly are looking this year to have more programming about this specific case study and these very important questions of how do we make never again a reality in a current climate where it seems to be ever again and ever again. So I appreciate very much those questions and the intent and the challenge it poses to us in the field and in the Cohen Center. Lisa and Patty, I have good news and bad news. The good news is we have one final question. The bad news is it's the hardest question of the night because it's going to ask us to be self-critical. We have had many questions asking about our thoughts about the current state, the current situation in the US. It's relatively easy to talk about problems and programs and policies abroad, but this question is asking us to think about our country. What is the role of the rule of law? Do we have concern about where the United States is right now? Do we believe the rule of law could solve problems related to the election and the possibility of electoral violence coming up in November? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just heard today on the news a very extensive thing about that the Trump administration has their lawyers out preparing for all sorts of ways to attack the election through the courts. And of course, crucial to this is the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice that presumably would lean the court into the favor for supporting Trump's arguments. I believe in the rule of law. I believe that we've been able to check much of what specifically the Trump administration has tried to do. I don't believe they believe in the rule of law. I think they know how to manipulate it. The really scary thing to me has been the understanding that institutions sometimes are only as good as the people in them. And I didn't really want to face that. You know, I believed our institutions were somewhat stronger than perhaps our own human frailty, but that, I guess, is stupid in a way, because I've seen the real, danger. But I also really believe, everybody has to get out there and, as Ben says, vote their conscience. We can't give up. We can't give up now. I've been proud of the American judiciary. Trump has appointed over 200 judges to the federal courts. I can't believe all of them are ideologues or aren't committed to fair and impartial trials. I don't know that. But I do know there's a lot of good people in the American judiciary that are trying very hard to not just maintain the rule of law, but sustain our belief and our trust in our institutions. It's without a doubt, it's a dark time.
Thank you. Elisa?
Yes, I agree that it's a very, very dark time. I think in the United States, we are in an era where where mass death has become normalized, where there's the threat that atrocity is normalized. These daily atrocities, new atrocities, one after another, have confused matters and led to a sense of irreality within the American public. Many of us feel we cannot keep up with what's going on. And then we have a looming constitutional crisis after the election. Part of the problem we face in the United States, in my opinion, is that we have never really gone through an accountability mechanism for the genocides and mass atrocities in our past. And so in many ways, we can't see and understand and feel the harms that are being done now to the extent that maybe we need to in order to protect democracy. But I gather hope from the fact the one difference we have that's major with Nazi Germany or the Weimar Republic, the democracy that died in the face of the Nazi onslaught, is that Germany did not have a long history of democratic values and democratic institutions. So whereas I agree that institutions in a way are only as good as the people who are in them, at least we have a long history of democratic institutions that are fraught through slavery, fraught through genocide, right? Fraught through mass sterilization, coercive sterilization. There's so many, Jim Crow, there's so mass incarceration now. We can list these things, and indeed they're the core of why people are rising up, have been rising up this summer. But we do have those institutions, we do have this Constitution, and we have years and years and years of those values animating some of the most important social justice struggles in the world that have happened in the United States. And I'm hoping this country can draw on that history this fall to reaffirm that our Constitution matters. Without it, we're lost. And that it's time now for us to face our past, to show accountability for the crimes we've committed recently and in the distant past, and to move forward in a new way that's more reflective of the core values of this Constitution.
Thank you. I've been struck that one of the themes of the night, and I see it in one of our final statements from our friend in Australia who says, shouldn't the emphasis also be on teaching people how to stand up in the first place? And I think in Ben's comments, and Elisa and Patty, your comments as well, we've focused, and you've heard that message of the importance of bystanders becoming upstanders. As Patty said earlier, the importance of fighting the fights where you're at, of recognizing that wherever you are, you have leverage and responsibility to make a difference in the world in which you find yourself, whether that be a college dorm, a classroom, a community, or wherever you find yourself. You have that potential to make a difference. We certainly hope that you will continue to look for ways to connect with the Department of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the college, as well as tonight's sponsor of the event, the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies as well, over this coming year around these important issues. I want to close with some very important thank yous, certainly to my fellow panelists, Judge Whalen, Dr. Van Joden-Forgay, both brilliant people. Thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us. Misty Kennedy in the Keene State College Office of Ceremonies and Events did the wonderful job of maintaining the registration and teaching all of us how to mute and unmute and turn our videos on and off. So thank you very much, Misty. And most importantly, the staff of the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Michelle Kiowa, the Senior Administrative Assistant, who did, as she always does, so much of the behind-the-scenes work to make this event a success. Tom White is the Coordinator of Educational Outreach at the Cohen Center. Tom was our original point of contact with Ben Ferencz, and for the past couple of years has pushed us to try and find ways to bring Ben to us. And I think we've done the best we could with the incredible interview that we gathered for tonight. And it's also a very wonderful pleasure to welcome our new director of the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Mr. Peter Mcbride, who was finally able to find his way here just last Friday. So again, thank you all for your time, for your attention, for your concern, and we'll certainly look forward to seeing you in future programs. Have a good evening.